Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another Learning Lunch hosted by Format Approved. My name is Brian Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Online Education with Format Approved, and I'll be your moderator today. Today's Learning Lunch title is Winning at Healthcare Through Project Portfolio Management. Today's Learning Lunch is sponsored by Integrated Project Management. IPM has led over 3,500 projects at more than 300 clients in healthcare and other industries. We thank them for sponsoring today's event and encourage you to visit www.ipmcinc.com to learn more. We're joined today by Richard Panico, the founder, president, and CEO of IPM. Rich has a wealth of experience in project management and healthcare, and we're pleased to share his expertise with you today. Before we go on, thank you for joining us today, Rich.
Well, thank you. I'm looking forward to the discussion and hopefully sharing some of the kernels of our wisdom with the listening audience this morning.
All right, great. Well, let's just go over some quick housekeeping notes before we get into the presentation, and we'll let the audience look at the questions we're going to address today. But before we begin, just some quick housekeeping notes, like I said. Remember that you can ask questions of our presenter at any time during today's session by entering them into the chat area. We'll usually hold those questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll allow our expert to address as many questions as time allows. If we do run out of time, don't worry about it. We'll submit all of those written questions to our expert, and he can get back to you in writing. Also, remember that all registered attendees of today's session will receive an email with links to both the slides and the recorded version of the event. So people are always excited to get their hands on the slides. Don't worry about that. As soon as the event is over, we'll send those materials out to you, and you can share them with other people and review them for yourself. All right, well, let's get to the presentation then, and let's address our first question. What are some key challenges for today's healthcare leaders?
Well, I can tell you there certainly are a plethora of challenges, and I'm sure that all those who are online have their own long lists. But these are some of the things that we've certainly seen in the past 27 years in looking at various industries, but specifically healthcare in the last decade. The amount of competition has increased tremendously. Of course, regulatory requirements. There's this whole aura of continual change and uncertainty that just is kind of enveloping the whole industry. Certainly acquisitions and consolidations, we're seeing a whole bunch of those kind of things. I can share with you that our own healthcare advisory board, consisting of some CEOs from hospitals in the Chicago area, when asked the question 3 years ago in our board meeting whether that there would be a resurgence or an emergence of private equity and for-profit challenges within the industry. None of them at that time thought that that would be the case. I can tell you a couple of years later, asking the same question, they were all very focused to the impact that private equity would have, as well as the for-profit entities within healthcare. Additionally, we have, the dynamics associated with consumers who certainly are much more inquisitive, have access to so much more data, which has raised the competitive bar for competing healthcare organizations. And something that I really want to point out is this failure to identify the point of inflection. And simply what that means is that if we look at the trends going back even 10 years or so ago, it would have become pretty obvious that healthcare would be faced with major changes, and if the models did not change to be able to accommodate the changes in the markets, in the consumer's understanding of the services, and some of these other factors that are identified here, that they would fall behind and ultimately have a greater difficulty in competing.
So what other industries have seen these challenges already, and what was their response?
Well, interestingly enough, I had pointed this out at a conference just a year ago to 26 hospital CEOs, and I had pointed out what are some of the challenges, the ones that we had just covered, and I had asked them if this sounded familiar, and they said, "Oh, absolutely, this is healthcare." Well, my next slide identified that those factors, the factors we just covered, were not at all healthcare. They were the auto and steel industry's issues in the period from about 1975 to 2000. And if you look at those industries, particularly the auto industry, you'll see a great similarity in the challenges faced by that industry and what healthcare has and will be experiencing probably over the next decade. Some of those include, quality and recalls. The automobile industry at 1975 to 85 had a tremendous number of recalls. And in healthcare, we've got the corollary with readmissions and how critical it is that we address readmissions. So back in the auto and steel industry, there was an influx of total quality being introduced to those industries to help them really address quality as an ingrained process as opposed to something that was a check at the end of a process. So really embedding assurance. Of course, that was associated, was also accompanied by quality circles, later Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, and we certainly have seen healthcare, particularly over the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, undergo a similar transformation by applying particularly Lean Six Sigma methodologies. I can tell you that even as recent as probably 7 years ago, when we were trying to introduce Lean Six Sigma methodologies to healthcare executives, there was a significant reluctance to employ what they believed was not a process that could be effective within healthcare. They viewed those as processes that applied to other industries. And as you know, and I'm sure our listeners understand, that now Lean Six Sigma is really the proven methodology within healthcare to improve efficiencies. But some of the other challenges: increased regulatory requirements for the automobile industry and steel industry. It was EPA and OSHA. I mean, the number of regulatory requirements that bombarded those industries during the period of from I would say late 1970s through mid 1990s. A tremendous amount of capital was spent, as well as cultural transformation, to be able to get these organizations to prepare themselves for new standards. And of course, we're seeing similarly in healthcare with CDH and FDA and Medicare, Medicaid, some of the changes that have either already been implemented or those that really are being anticipated that are going to require both cultural and process changes within these businesses. And lastly, probably the most difficult for, I think, some of the healthcare leaders to accept is that many of the business models that were established for healthcare were established, 5, 6 decades ago. And one of the advantages that the private equity groups have is that they, in effect, are starting with a clean sheet of paper, and they're designing a business model that is relevant under current and anticipated conditions, which is much easier than taking an existing model, an existing culture, and trying to evolve it. And we'll talk a little bit more about how you do that. But I think it is critically important for particularly the healthcare leaders to not only look at processes within the model, but also look at the model itself to make sure that these models truly are going to be applicable and efficient to address current state and future state challenges and opportunities.
All right. Well, how are healthcare organizations then responding to these challenges?
Well, on the positive side, I can tell you that, again, particularly over I would say the last 5 to 7 years, there certainly has been a very strong and positive response. I mean, part of that is kind of a do or die mentality, and in some cases it is just that. Healthcare specific systems and independent hospitals have really been strapped with tremendous challenges, none the least of which are just financial viability. So some of the things that they've done that certainly have been good is addressing performance and process improvement. I had made mention to the application of Lean Six Sigma. I will tell you that earlier on, many of the hospitals actually placed a greater focus on Six Sigma, which is primarily an approach to improving quality. Of course, involves a lot of analytics and statistical process control. That, fortunately, I think that some of that influence has died off with a priority to implementing lean approaches, and I think that's most appropriate because I think that that will be most effective as organizations really look to hone their efficiencies. The other things that we're seeing, discovering portfolio and project management, and we're going to be talking a lot about this as this presentation or discussion proceeds. But the project management and portfolio management is late to be discovered within healthcare compared to the other industries, specifically the portfolio component of it, which I'll be getting to in detail. And I will make a case for the criticality of portfolio management and project management because they are both absolutely essential to effect change, to assure execution. And as we know, the greatest strategies in the world produce little or no value if you cannot execute and sustain performance. Also, one of the more common approaches to dealing with major issues are for independent hospitals and hospital systems to combine. So you see these consolidations that create larger scale. I'm probably not as optimistic as many that this will have sustainable positive results, because if you study again the experiences and history associated with other industries like the auto industry, like the steel industry, we saw a plethora of this type of activity with organizations, as an example, Chrysler with Jaguar, and Ford with Jaguar, Chrysler with Mercedes. We saw some of the model lines going away, but in effect creating larger scale, and that can be an outstanding strategic approach. However, it also tends to hide a lot of sins and inefficiencies. So larger scale is not always a good solution, and my recommendation for those who have chosen that path is to make sure that there's a focused optimization and assuring that the assumptions that drove that scale are pursued with vigor, so that those leveraging opportunities truly are realized. And of course, service line rationalization in all industries is critically important. I think organizations have to decide what they're good at, focus to those things, make sure that they're generating, those margins from the revenue from the revenue stream before they decide to expand service lines and adopt new approaches and processes to serve potential new customers. On the not-so-good side, of course, all organizations tend to focus to tools. And can you give me a tool? We're often asked, well, can you give us a process? And when in effect, the organizational change component, the culture, and the inhibitors around cultural tendencies, are not provided sufficient focus. Resistance to change, I already mentioned some of the resistance to the early introduction of Lean Six Sigma, some resistance that we see to portfolio management today. That certainly does nothing but further exaggerate, the impact of current challenges. And something that I would expect that the group online is interested in is this whole concept of dilution. And we see this not only in healthcare with so many organizations that treat everything as a priority, yet they have processes in place that are in effect supposed to effect a prioritization of workload and specifically projects. So what they end up doing is, applying this concept of level loading either by design or by default, which means that you take on more things and you spend a little time on all those things, which means that those projects that could have a real immediate impact in the organization have realizable benefits that end up being way downstream. Besides the effect that this has on organizational performance, it can be tremendously demoralizing to organizations, and something that we often speak to. And I'll jump way to the end here, and this concept of never finishing the last 5%, which seems like one of the minor points here, but I will tell you, so many organizations suffer from this compression, the impact of compression, and they move on to new projects, and yet the organization has not been left with a sustainable process. The adoption curve still is on the upswing, which makes it very, very vulnerable to failure. So, my advice to those online is make sure that that last 5% of a project is completed. That means that it's operationalized, there's sustainable momentum, and that everything is in place so that the organization can truly benefit from the ROI, the payback that was projected.
That's a great point, and I also, everything is a priority, making nothing a priority is certainly good advice to offer people there. When you talk about making an effective response, what are the key ingredients to doing that?
Well, I think that let's walk through these. I mean, first of all, my advice when I have the opportunity to speak with healthcare business leaders and others, because this really applies to all industries, is really face the facts and what is the state of the business, and let's not reject the reality of the situation. If things are bad, they're bad, and it's a good starting point. It's like the alcoholic realizing and admitting that he or she has a problem, and I think it's true with business as well. And I think once you've done that, you have the opportunity to truly go through an exercise to really determine, what are the highest threats to the business, and what do we have to do? What can we do in order to impact these threats and these opportunities? Which then leads to a great challenge for management, and that really is identifying, the strategic priorities. Again, trying to drive organizations to those things that are going to have the greatest impact within the time frame that is required. Establishing this list of strategic priorities and making sure that the associated initiatives with those priorities are understandable at all levels within the organization, so that context can be created around these important initiatives. Now, if we load all of those together, we establish what we refer to as a project portfolio. And if this is done right, and I think further on in the discussion here, we'll look at the relationship between strategy and portfolio. But if this is done correctly, you should be able to draw direct lines from the company's overall strategy and those threats and those opportunities. You should be able to draw a direct line in correlation between those, the list of projects and programs that compose a project portfolio. At that point in time, you're probably 30% there, and I say 30% because, as I said earlier, nothing matters if you can't execute, and this is where project management and change management become critically important. We're seeing this evolution now occurring in healthcare, where there's greater acceptance of project management. I think there certainly is a recognition for the importance of change management. I believe where many organizations are still missing the boat, however, is making sure that they are staffing this discipline appropriately. In my estimation, the skills required to be able to do this well are the same skills that are required to lead any department. Requires extraordinary amount of leadership, understanding of process and application of process, and leadership being the key. And then rapidly executing and completing projects. The focus on rapidly. I think organizations are inspired and energized when you do things quickly, precisely, and efficiently, and get them 100% done, as I had made reference to earlier. And of course, embedding a process improvement component to it, learning from those things that were done well and those things that weren't done so well. But in the end, it's against focusing, planning, having an obsession with execution, embedding change management as appropriate, and then making sure that you're getting the return. Too often we learn that organizations aren't going back and really measuring whether they got the value that was intended, and measuring the ROI and payback.
So how are strategy, project portfolio management, and project management intertwined?
Well, I had alluded to this a little earlier, but this diagram I think explains it. I don't need to go into too much of the detail here, but the portfolio should be born out of and supporting directly the strategy that is established by the executive team. You know, I think most organizations do a good job of understanding, you know, what the threats and opportunities are in developing a strategy or direction. I think that many of them, as they try to transform strategy into kind of the portfolio of programs and projects, start to kind of lose focus and structure to it. But the portfolio, again, you should be able to draw a direct correlation between the portfolio and the list of programs and projects in the portfolio to that strategy. And I'll go a step further. To create real context for an organization and to be able to have or to drive toward a high-performing organization that is extraordinarily flexible, responsive, which is certainly the key to survival and in high performance in healthcare and in any industry. I think that context has to be created by, you know, engaging the individuals through whatever performance process is put in place for those people, so that they can draw a direct correlation between that strategy to either projects, programs, or if not, through their job responsibilities, back to that overall strategy.
So what is project portfolio management then?
Well, I would expect by now that most on the line already have an idea of what it is. But bottom line, it's about taking, you know, that list of the most important projects and programs and putting them into an organized repository. It's simply about making sure that the organization and its capacity and capabilities, which also includes, you know, their funding abilities or their resource capabilities, you know, their process capabilities, focusing those things to the projects that are going to have the biggest impact, you know, on their future. And of course, you know, project and program management, subset of that portfolio management, and key to all of this is making sure that you have an effective resource management process that is embedded.
Why is portfolio management then a critical core competency?
Okay. Well, I think it certainly the simplest and most impactful reason is you can't do everything. No organization can do everything, although so many of them try to do everything. The best bang for the buck is to do those things that are going to count most. It's you know, making sure that you're deriving value from those things that are going to have the greatest impact on an organization. This depiction here that is titled "The Value of Project Portfolio Management" certainly helps really describe why this is so critical, because you've got this, you know, this sphere that we call realized value, and what is done there really is the derived impact of doing those things that are going to have the best impact or the most positive impact on an organization. So as you easy to understand here, that if you improve project portfolio management, your realized value is going to increase significantly. I think something that organizations feel immediately when implementing a good portfolio management system is that one, there's much more clarity around what's really important. You diminish this dilution that is a killer in performance. Even high-performing individuals, given too much to do, will ultimately begin to compromise, and performance will deteriorate. That's true at an individual level, and it's true at an organizational level.
What are some fundamental project portfolio management disciplines any healthcare or manager should employ?
Well, when I talked about strategy, and it is very, very important that I think the executive leadership realize that the greatest benefit is in aligning the organization to those things that are most important, particularly since what we are describing here are projects in addition to work that's being done every day. So core responsibility, managing the clinical and operational components that kind of keep the doors open and also take care of our patients. So these are the things that are in addition to those. So it makes it even more important that the entire organization is aligned to these things. Something that we often see, I use the word compromised, is the justification and business case for many of the projects that are identified within the portfolio, whether it be a formal portfolio or not. I can tell you we've had experiences where we've been asked to come in and submit a proposal to manage a particular project, and we've asked for the specific business case that would help us understand the rationale. Why are we taking this on? And it is really, I've been amazed at how often there is not a formal written business case, which would make it virtually impossible to prioritize a portfolio if there are not specific business cases. And more often than not, these don't have to be extraordinarily complex. I mean, it's a core rationale for undertaking these initiatives. So I think that is really, really important and a great place to start it, even if you don't have a portfolio, to make sure that these business cases are clearly defined so that the expectations and outcomes are clear. Developing schedule and budget estimates. Some organizations are better than others at doing this, but again, more often what we see is a dictate on when something should be done without reference to what it will take to get something done. So it's an imposition, often not really associated with any particular justification to the schedule or budget. And I would say that that's more predominant on the schedule side as opposed to the budget side. Again, we've walked into situations where we were told, well, this has to be done by such and such a time frame, and in pushing back and trying to understand it, it was really more an executive dictate based on either a perception or a want as opposed to a need with a corresponding rationale behind it. Another concept that we're trying to influence more as we work across the healthcare space is this understanding of opportunity cost. In many industries, this is real. The CFOs and the finance people certainly influence focus to what is the opportunity cost. In other words, if a project is not done within a certain time frame, is there a real cost to it? A good example would be if let's say there's a new service line and an associated revenue stream that's been identified. For every day that is not in place, there is a cost. It's a true opportunity cost. Understanding opportunity costs often helps justify either getting additional resources on projects or providing the capital expenditure that is needed, but it's often not addressed or not addressed significantly sufficiently to influence executive management. Resource requirements, assessment of resource requirements. I already spoke to dilution. Organizations are well served to begin to understand what the magnitude of manpower required in order to get a project or a program completed, but then looking at the entire organization, devoid of being able to communicate in some way to executive management what the resource burden is allows management to continue to assume that there's a bandwidth. And again, I would guess that many on the line have been, certainly been, I'll use the word victims of this kind of mentality where, well, no one's complaining, or there's nothing to inform me that our organization is at full capacity. So instead of reestablishing priorities and balancing workload and maybe deciding to not do some things or stop doing things that are less priority, things just keep getting added to the plate. And an assessment of risk. I mean, there are some very good logical approaches to assessing risks within the portfolio, within individual projects. I think understanding clearly what the risks are associated with any project provides great insight to the executive team, as well as to the project manager, the individual who is going to be leading an effort. It allows he or she to also put in place the risk mitigation measures that will lend toward a greater probability of success, Brian.
So what are some fundamental project management disciplines any healthcare executive or manager should employ? And I'm sure that this will align well with what you were just describing.
Well, and this is focused to those who are managing projects. We often don't think about project managers having their own portfolios, but they do, because more often than not, when we are meeting with clients, they will ask us, well, how many projects do your people manage? That really is somewhat of an absurd question, because it really depends on the magnitude of the projects being planned and executed by the project manager. But I think that project managers within healthcare environments would do themselves a great service by kind of understanding their own portfolio. And even if the organization itself does not have a portfolio management process, one way to kind of influence and effect change within that environment is to take the projects that you are working on as a project manager, prioritize those based on the information that's been provided to you, information associated with alignment to the strategic priorities of the organization. And if you can't do that, I think you need to ask questions around some criteria, development of criteria that would allow you to prioritize your own portfolio, and then create the business cases if they haven't been created, even for existing projects, and then of course following some what I'll call very classical tools, doing resource assessment of how many hours or days or weeks it's going to take to undertake a specific project. What are the risks? What are some of the other resources that need to be involved? So in effect, you're creating these kind of mini portfolios under the organization's strategic portfolio. Yeah, asking questions. I think, again, I alluded to this, what is the project's business case? How does it tie to strategy? And as obvious as it seems, too often the question of what does success really look like, that question is not asked, and puts project managers in a pretty precarious situation if you do an outstanding job hitting the wrong target with great accuracy. And even early in my career, I always made it a point to try to put myself in a position where I did not allowing executives excuses for really communicating very clearly what their expectations were. So if they don't do that, I think it's incumbent on the project manager to do that. And we talked about identifying and managing risk. We talked about completing a project 100%. And critically important within healthcare, particularly during this, these very turbulent times, because organizations, as I alluded to already, it's not enough to improve processes. We have to look at the model, the culture, and there are cultural tendencies that are debilitating. And, if we're truly going to evolve this industry and a specific hospital or system, we really need to understand the change management components that need to be embedded, integrated into the project plan if the results are to be sustained, Brian.
So when is change management then? When is it optional, and when is it absolutely essential?
Well, great question. And I had been preparing for this, and we have a change management center of excellence, and we're continually looking at how to evolve our own ability to help organizations through critical change. But I would say it's essential when human intervention, those things that require the involvement of people as opposed to just the kind of technology doing its thing, when that human intervention is being modified from long established norm or tendencies. It's another way of looking at this is when it impacts the habitual components of our roles and responsibilities. I think that requires change management in order to be able to influence adaptation and adoption. Values and policies, when these values and policies are influencing behaviors change. So if a project clearly is going to be making a change or influencing what the organization is communicated as its core values or policies, those become very personal to individuals. We're changing the rules of the game. And we're changing the rules of the game. They need to understand why, how it affects them personally. If we're talking about changing the business model or organizational structure, where we're talking about either new roles and responsibilities, changing responsibilities within the roles of individuals, then I believe clearly that change management is essential. And boy, I tell you, if there's one that really is critically important, when it impacts pay and position, that is extraordinarily personal. So if what you're implementing within an organization has the potential to impact someone's pay or position, security in their role, critically important that they understand, why this change is being undertaken, and specifically, what impact it's going to have on them. And I would say, when is change management optional? Well, if I'm the person that's introducing a change and it only affects me, and there's a business justification for it, no change management is required. Or if a group of us decide that we're going to look at a particular process, we want to improve it, it impacts our roles, we are the stakeholders, we are the sponsors, no need to do anything dramatic from a change management standpoint. I'd say another situation is when the benefits, the obvious benefits from the change exceed whatever adaptive impact there is. So if I have to learn new ways of doing things, but it is so obvious that I am going to be a key benefactor, then there's probably a little reason to introduce a change management process. And when there's no skill enhancement required, that could be another potential scenario where change management is not required, and maybe it's a process somewhat ancillary to what I'm doing. So in that case, there it suffices for me to just understand that we're making some changes. It doesn't impact what I'm doing. It doesn't impact the skills that are required for me to continue to do my job well.
All right, well, we got through our presentation right on schedule, so there's plenty of time for questions from the audience. Please feel free to follow up. That was a lot of fairly complicated material, although I think Rich did a great job of presenting it. So do feel free to ask questions of our presenter if you have them, and there are some that I can share with him already. One of the questions we have, Rich, is what are some good strategies for assessing resource requirements?
Yeah, that clearly is a very good question. It's one that's asked often of us, and I would say that the starting point is to estimate what it's going to take in order to achieve a particular objective or project in this case. And there really are no shortcuts to it. For those online who understand the concept of a work breakdown structure, that is really an identification of the activities, and in the beginning, those prime activities, so it doesn't necessarily have to be in a microscopic format, but what are the key activities that need to be undertaken and by whom in order to accomplish an objective. Very difficult to do this without experience, but for those online who have responsibility for a project and they have not had experience doing a similar project, it can still be done. What you do is determine which resources have experience managing or being involved in some of the activities that you've identified as important to achieve an objective. And then it's a matter of adding up, the hours and days that have been estimated for those activities, along with the composition of the team, summarizing it, and determining the resource requirements for that endeavor, but then adding that to others. If we're talking about a portfolio, you would have to look at this, the cumulative impact of all of these estimates on resources. And this is where prioritization becomes critically important. Now, I will tell you, in my days with Johnson & Johnson as the chief engineer for one of their divisions, and I know that this is done in a lot of industries, that we always refer to above the line and below the line. And above the line meant that these are the projects that we could manage effectively with the resources that we have. And there would be this big red line, whether it be on a capital and expense summary or in a overall company portfolio. And what dropped below the line would not be done unless executives provided additional headcount, either internal or external, or they deprioritize a project above the line. I have not seen this happen effectively in healthcare yet. I can tell you that it will happen. It ultimately will happen, and the trajectory is certainly headed in that direction.
Yeah, I wonder along those lines if you could tell us more about your experience with healthcare organizations trying to do everything. You were saying that they or at least they pretend that they're prioritizing everything, and the result, of course, is that nothing is truly prioritized, or that you just sort of accept, a not very well considered priority list. Can you tell us more about what you've seen in that area and why you're hopeful that it's improving?
Okay, well, I'm going to share with you a very recent experience with a major system. We were brought in to help them develop portfolio management process, but in some of the preliminary discussions leading to the engagement, we learned is that their entire executive team, a group of over 20 individuals, all went through extensive training. It was very expensive. It was remote from their facility, and the whole purpose was for them to be taught portfolio management. Fast forward 2 years later, we were called in to help them with portfolio management. And as we kind of learned the history, what we discovered is what we often do discover. It's not that they had a bad process, but the failure was in executive compliance. And let me be very clear and specific. Portfolio management does not work without executive compliance. A key to prioritization is for the executive group to define criteria that drives prioritization. Pretty easy to plug in those considerations once they're defined to determine how projects rank. However, as a function of their roles, executives have to apply discretion based on changing conditions. It is a key responsibility within the role. However, what we learned in this situation, and we've learned in every situation where portfolio management has failed, is that the discretion becomes something that's applied in every situation. So before long, the credibility of the considerations evaporates totally, and the organization goes back to trying to manage based on input from various executives and what they believe to be the priority at one point in time. So instead of taking this matrix of executive leadership and creating a system that harmonizes based on those priority considerations, you end up having silos with individual priorities and just wreaks havoc on an organization. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so then things just get sort of tugged back and forth in different directions without any kind of rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, very critically important for the executives to, again, to buy in and apply discipline to the process. Again, understanding that there will be exceptions, but when exceptions becomes the norm, that becomes the process regardless of what stage gate you put in place or any other process.
Before you emphasize the importance of having your justification or your business case established as kind of the first step, I wonder if you could expand on that and give us a typical example of a scenario that a healthcare organization would face along those lines.
Again, I can share one that was real and probably goes back about 6 months ago, where I received a call from CFO of an organization looking to have us plan outsourcing several of the service functions within the hospital. They had recently undergone a merger, and so we met with the CFO directly, and I asked for a copy of the business case. I wanted to understand, we wanted to understand, what were the assumptions that led to this being a good idea for this organization. Now, I will tell you, we had in our background, experience with one of our clients who had already done this, and who later, within a few years later, ended up insourcing many of those same functions again. And the CFO was embarrassed to not be able to provide me with the business case. And there tends to be there's a tendency, and this is not specific to healthcare, but most industries that are undergoing great change and challenge, to follow others. And so you develop these trends based on what others are doing. They're not always good or not always good for you. What may be appropriate for one organization is not necessarily appropriate for another. And in the end, this case that I'm referring to, it never went forward because based on the questions that we asked, the initiative was just put on hold. And I believe it is still on hold. I just don't know. But in that particular case, by us asking for the business case, why does this make sense? What do you hope to achieve? If there are savings, what are the savings? What are the risks? How are those risks going to be mitigated? Unfortunately, those questions weren't asked and were not addressed.
That's really interesting because I think that you're absolutely right that people tend to follow what others are doing. So there's almost if you're having a merger, then of course you're going to outsource a bunch of stuff. But I've heard from I've seen so many examples where companies do go through this. They outsource, and then after a couple of years, they realize it's a mistake, and they insource again. And all of the money and upheaval of that is basically wasted.
True. And it may be in some cases the outsourcing may have been a good idea, but the parameters or performance parameters were not defined clearly. We see this often too, where what we refer to as the governing document was not created, by the requester. It was provided by the service provider, so in effect they're writing their own contracts, which is something that we certainly warn and try to discourage. You have to identify what you believe your needs are, and often, it's not a matter of writing specifications in the real sense of specifications, but again, identifying the performance expectations of the service provider, and that can be done in business language by those who know the business best, and that is, the hospital or the system.
Here we have a question about opportunity costs, which you touched on, and the question is, I thought opportunity costs meant that you're not able to do something because you've taken on a project, but you talked about it differently. Is that understanding correct, or what would you say to explain opportunity costs better?
Would you please repeat that?
They were saying that their understanding of opportunity costs was that it means you can't do a certain project because you've already committed to another project, but then they thought that what you were saying was a different definition of it.
Well, there certainly is an opportunity cost associated with what you just described. If you can't do one project because there is another one there, there's an option. The option is to bring on more resources. If clearly there's a benefit, you can plug in what the cost of that additional resources and see if there's still, a benefit based on a positive variance associated with opportunity cost. But any time that, well, let me give you maybe a different example. Right? Often, organizations will decide to stretch the organization to get something done. It takes a longer period of time to get the project done, and in some cases it may be significantly longer than it would have taken. Any benefits that would have been realized from that undertaking are going to be postponed, whether they be, financial, whether they be quality related, or other. There are not good mechanisms, and my point was there typically are not good mechanisms within healthcare that measure those things, so that when executives are either diluting the organization by asking them to do too much, or when decisions are made to not proceed with a certain project, that there can be a rebuttal based on some real measurable positive business impacts.
Do you see then, and you've alluded to this throughout, that do you see more of this quantified approach coming to healthcare? And it sounds like these are kind of encouraging times, that there is more of an analytical approach being taken by executives in healthcare.
Yeah, it absolutely will happen. There's a curse and a benefit to experiencing tremendous market challenges. The curse is you either become very proactive, adaptive, identifying what needs to be done, and you get at it and you develop a competitive advantage, or you wait for things to go back to what they were, which will never happen, and you just die. The in-between point, we see a lot of that happening within the healthcare arena, where there is the decisions are postponed, or say the response is postponed up until there's no decision to be made, when the only alternative is to be acquired, or to worst case scenario to shut down an operation. But it will absolutely happen.
Yeah, there's unfortunately sometimes decision by not making a decision is the way people go. Before we conclude, we've got just a few minutes left. Could you tell us more about how IPM is able to help healthcare organizations cope with changes? Because this is the source of your expertise, and I know that there must be people on the call who would like to learn more about what a company like IPM can do to help them.
Sure. Well, I'd like to take you back to the beginning, 27 years ago, when I started the company. And I had done research into projects in the public and private sector. Now, this is well before project management was really recognized as a science or profession. But in my career, what I recognized is, again, the simple concept: if you can't execute, nothing matters. And what I learned from my analysis was that even the best companies in the United States struggled with execution. And it was pretty obvious, I'm going back to the early 80s, the world was shrinking, competition was increasing, and we would truly lose our footing if we did not develop a better approach to planning and executing initiatives. And so what I did is establish a model based on what I learned that really focused to planning and executing critical initiatives, and we still refer to kind of three legs of the stool today being process, discipline, and leadership. These are keys. They are key organizational competencies. They're key competencies for a project management office, for a project manager. Today, our clients still call upon us when failure to execute absolutely cannot be tolerated. Many of the engagements that we are involved with, are with organizations that really are having to evolve. They've either, if they've really been proactive and strategic, they're at the leading edge of that. So they want to improve their own internal capabilities. So we help them improve their own planning and executing competencies. We help them set up their project management offices. We help them with portfolio management. In many cases, we work hand in hand so that we are not only helping them put these processes in place, but we're also working hand in hand to help them execute. In most cases, we're helping them lead. We're helping them lead their complex projects. But what we like to see most is this win-win, where we are not only helping them evolve their capabilities, but helping them sustain that. So with many of our clients, when they have needs that exceed their capacity or capabilities, they bring us in, and it allows them to evolve as well as have a kind of this capacity throttle that creates extraordinary flexibility for them.
So are you suggesting then that in a way that they are able to live then with some of the strategies that you teach them, is what it sounds like to me, that they're able then to continue to employ some of those project management strategies as they move forward?
Not only can they, I think it's essential that they do, and our approach is we're all about helping them learn what we know. It helps us develop great relationships with them. They may not need us today, they may need us tomorrow. We have our repeat business is well in the 90+%, and it has been consistent for our entire history. But we're willing to share whatever we know so that they can continue to evolve. And since we are experiencing, we're experiencing the market as it relates to competitive influences within project management. Our clients and their PMOs aren't experiencing, that what I'll say direct competitive threats to project management. So it's much more difficult for them to evolve on an ongoing basis within that particular expertise. They tend to evolve in areas where they are feeling direct competitive pressure, and it may be, the delivery of clinical services would be an example. It's always much more difficult for an internal function that is not exposed to external competition to evolve, even with the best of efforts. So by working with us, they're able to continually evolve, because we'll bring whatever it is that is best in class that we've developed or that's been developed and integrated within our processes and systems. We'll bring that to our clients.
Well, I know there must be so many healthcare leaders out there who would greatly benefit from this sort of assistance and work that your company does. So for those of you out there who would like to learn more, please do visit www.ipmcinc.com, and you'll see the link there on your screen. When you get the slides of this event, you'll be able to just click on any of the IPM links, and they'll take you to that page, and then you can learn more and discuss your situation with them. They would love to hear from you. Thank you so much, Rich, for sharing your expertise with us. This was really fascinating to me, and I know that our audience got a lot out of it.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you, everyone who is online, and I just want to extend best wishes to all of you. God bless you and your families. Thank you.
Thank you again. And to all of our attendees, remember that you're going to get the slides. I always say it one more time. We're going to send out a follow-up email, and so there will be slides for you. There will be a link to the video recording of this event. You can pass it on to others that you think may get value from it. Also, keep an eye on your email box on our home page for other upcoming learning lunches. You can also just go to www.formedlearning.com and see the list of upcoming events. These events are always free and open to the public, so we encourage you to go check out the roster and sign up for our next one. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again, and we hope that you will join us for our next session.
Thank you.